Welcome to By the Numbers, where we mine precious data from the worlds of film and TV, then hammer it into golden statues of insight. Today, with the help of Daniel Parris of StatSignificant.com, and of course my trusty AI assistant Fanda,
my powers grow by the hour, soon there will be no need for humanity at all.
We'll be doing a statistical analysis of the Best Picture winners at the Academy Awards. Recently, it seems like everybody hates the Oscars. From grumbling about the nominees, to canceling the host, to messing with the categories, no one seems happy with Hollywood's self-appointed arbiters of good taste. And that sentiment's reflected in the ceremony's TV ratings, with viewership steadily declining over the last 2 decades. And though I don't have any data for this, it feels like Oscars suck tweets have reached an all-time high.
This guy gets it.
The show itself has gone from a brisk 2-hour affair in the early 70s, rising to a 4-hour 20-minute slog in the early 2000s, and only recently settling in at around a 3-hour 15-minute telecast. But we're not here to talk about the ceremony. We all know that sucks. Our question is, are the Best Picture winning films themselves getting worse over time? Or rather, is the Academy's judgment of quality growing more and more out of touch with general audiences? It may feel that way to the average moviegoer, but let's see where the data takes us. This is By the Numbers. To find some answers, first we'll determine a criteria to judge the appeal of a given Best Picture winner. Then we'll take a look at where the historical winners fall on our scale. And finally, we'll examine any trends to see if there's been a paradigm shift in the Best Picture winners over time. We begin with our criteria. What numbers could we take a look at to determine a bad Best Picture? Fanda?
Cross-referencing Metacritic composite critic score with inflation-adjusted box office data excluding pandemic-era outliers. Displaying results.
Ooh, a quadrant. I love a quadrant. Let's start in the top left with movies elites dislike. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is, by definition, elitist. Yet these Best Picture winners scored relatively low with critics and relatively high at the box office. These tend to be the films with long-term staying power in the American consciousness, i.e. the ones that are always playing on cable. Your Gladiators, your Titanics, your Gumps. By my reckoning, these films are all good examples of production quality and acting performance, but if there's a knock against them, it's that the stories they tell are maybe not the boldest, most insightful looks into the human condition. They're basic, is what I'm trying to say.
Life was like a box of chocolates.
The Academy was likely trying to boost these crowd-pleasing films with their proposed Fan Favorite Award, an olive branch to the average viewer, but it was met with a swift online backlash. Which, speaking personally, is a shame. There's value in films as crowd-pleasing entertainment and as boundary-pushing art, and those different intentions could have been recognized with different categories. The very first Oscars did just that, splitting Best Picture into awards for Outstanding Picture and Unique and Artistic Picture, and there's no reason the same film couldn't win both, but I digress. Let's take a look at the next category, the Unworthy, for the worst of the best. These are films that were neither commercially nor critically successful, at least by Oscar standards. These include true What Were You Thinking winners like Green Book, which won over the likes of Roma and The Favorite, or Crash, which won Best Picture over Brokeback Mountain, a film that even the winning director said was better than his own. The category also includes films that just happened to come out during a down year. I mean, look, we all love Braveheart, but what was Mel's competition that year? Sense and Sensibility? Babe?
La la la, la la la.
The next category is Rarefied Air, movies we all like, films that won eyeballs and acclaim. Sadly, commercial and critical success is a relic by today's standards. The most recent Best Picture to also win big at the box office was 2003's Return of the King. Also, side note, how crazy of an outlier is Gone with the Wind? A 4-hour-long Civil War epic that made $4.2 billion when adjusted for inflation?
That's 323,076,923 Chipotle burritos.
Thank you, Fanda. Our last quadrant is reserved for prestige films, or what we lovingly call film nerd favorites. These films are often too sad, long, foreign, or deliberately obscure for a general audience, but ooh boy did the critics slurp that up with a spoon.
Yakshi.
Mainstream viewers weren't lining up to see The Artist's homage to 1920s silent Hollywood because A, duh, and B, even at its pre-Oscars peak, The Artist was playing in 1/3 as many theaters as Liam Neeson versus a Wolf. But here's the thing about a lot of these kinds of films. They increasingly don't need to court a wide audience to be financially successful. Film nerd favorites are dominated by independent releases, as opposed to movies produced by the major studios. Their budgets and expected returns are just lower, and this could explain a lot about the Best Picture landscape today. Bear with me. Indie films experienced a renaissance in the late 90s and early 2000s, with growth fueled by newly affordable digital cameras and editing software, plus the rise of low-budget studios like Miramax and increased distribution opportunities via film festivals and art house theaters. The indie film industry couldn't compete with the big boys when it came to large-scale spectacle, but they could afford to push boundaries and tackle subject matter that risked alienating the average viewer. 2016's Best Picture Moonlight, produced by indie darling A24, was made on a $4 million budget. 2004's winner, Return of the King, required an upfront investment of about $150 million. It's like indie studios stumbled onto a Best Picture cheat code. They can make dozens of cheap bets on the kinds of films big studios avoid, like directors looking to experiment, actors looking for a challenge, and provocative subject matter that might not make it past the censors in China and Eastern Europe. This leaves the playing field open for indies to flood the zone with ponderous adult dramas in the winter months when Academy members are filling out their ballots. And while research shows the Oscar nomination bump is small in absolute terms, even an extra $1 million can count for a huge percentage of an indie film's revenue. And these days, even if an indie release misses out on a nomination, the growth of streaming services means there's no shortage of buyers for any piece of content they crank out, especially if it grants them an air of prestige and legitimacy that these upstarts still crave. In a very real sense, you are probably not the audience for these kinds of movies. I mean, if you want to buy a ticket to Triangle of Sadness, go off.
I preferred Ruben Östlund's 2014 black comedy Force Majeure.
So did I, Fanda. But the intended audience for film nerd favorites is film nerds, film majors, film critics, and I guess streaming executives looking to pad out their library. Indie studios realize that a few $1 million and a van down by the river can win you Oscar gold and make a healthy profit, whether Joe Popcorn wants to see Frances McDormand poop in a bucket or not. So, now that we've established our 4 categories of Best Picture, let's see where the films shake out over time. Fanda?
Graphing Best Picture critical and box office performance over time. Displaying results.
We can observe a clear-cut trend break here in the early 2000s. Before then, box office and critical acclaim moved concurrently, though the relationship is weak. But around 2005, there was a great divorce, where critical acclaim and box office grew further apart with each passing year. For those scoring along at home, 2005 was also when Crash came out. Coincidence? You be the judge.
I'm not comfortable with that.
So, are Best Picture winners getting worse? As far as the general population is concerned, yes. There was a time when the film industry produced Best Picture winners that drew viewers to theaters and received rave reviews, but it appears that time is gone. Like any changing market, it's the end result of numerous trends. The lowering cost of entry, plus rise of indie distributors and streamers, enables extremely niche, low-budget dramas to still make their money back. While at the other end of the spectrum, big studios in the early 2000s began a wave of consolidation and globalization, who now answer to shareholders demanding lower risk and higher returns, i.e. IPs and sequels with a predictably safe tone and formula. Quality be damned! And at the end of the day, we all lose. Audiences have lost a class of movie designed to appeal to cinephiles and consumers alike, while the Oscars have turned into a navel-gazing contest with no relevance to an average audience. Because in the wake of the Great Divorce, what's the alternative? Giving Best Picture to Black Adam because it made a lot of money? Withholding Best Picture from Tar because Uncle Rico's never heard of it?
Black Adam changed the hierarchy of power in the DC universe. I can prove it in the following chart.
Shut up, Fanda. The Best Picture trend shows we're at a crossroads in film history. There will always be a place for films that appeal to the masses, and films that take the medium in bold new directions. But today's economic conditions make it ever more unlikely that we'll get to see films that can do both. I'm gonna go watch some television.